The first time I found my own signature on a document I never signed, I told myself it had to be a bank error. By the fifth time, I understood exactly who had learned to forge my handwriting and exactly how long she'd been practicing. My name is Sophia Marsh. I'm 29, married to my husband Ethan for 14 months, 5 months pregnant with our first child. 6 weeks ago, my mother-in-law Vivian moved into our guest room after hip surgery, promising it would only be a few weeks, tops, until I'm back on my feet. That was the story I believed. It isn't the story that turned out to be true. The changes started small enough that I second-guessed myself for noticing them at all. My grandmother's wedding china, boxed up in the garage before I'd even finished my coffee one morning, impractical with a baby coming, dear, you'll thank me. My spice rack reorganized alphabetically, my grocery list rewritten in her handwriting with items I never buy circled in red pen. When I mentioned it to Ethan, gently, he barely looked up from his laptop. She's just trying to help, sophomore. She raised 3 kids on her own after Dad left. Let her feel useful. I wanted to let her feel useful. I really did. What I didn't expect was how quickly useful started to feel like something else entirely, a slow, patient redrawing of the lines around my own house, one I couldn't quite point to directly enough to explain out loud. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived addressed to me, from a bank I didn't recognize. I almost handed it straight to the recycling before something made me stop and actually read the return address twice. Sterling Trust Financial. I had never opened an account there in my life. I stood in the hallway holding it, Vivian's voice drifting warmly from the kitchen where she was teaching Ethan her mother's pot roast recipe, and felt a small, cold seed of unease plant itself somewhere behind my ribs. I opened the envelope alone in the bathroom, door locked, hands not quite steady. Inside was a welcome packet for a new savings account. My name listed as primary holder, opened 4 weeks earlier. 4 weeks earlier was exactly when Vivian had moved in. I didn't recognize the account number. I definitely didn't recognize the signature on the enclosed signature card, even though it was labeled with my full legal name in neat looping cursive that was almost how I sign my own name, except for a small hook at the end of the S that I've never once made in my life. I brought it to Ethan that night, laying it flat on the kitchen table between us. I didn't open this. I've never even heard of Sterling Trust. He frowned, turning the paper over like it might explain itself. Maybe it's a mistake. Some kind of identity theft thing, a data breach. Should we call the bank? That's what I'm saying we should do. Together. Tonight. Soph, it's 9 at night, and you've got that OB appointment early tomorrow. Let's just deal with it this weekend, okay? I'm sure it's nothing. I wanted to believe him. I wanted, more than almost anything in that moment, to be the kind of wife who didn't turn a strange envelope into an emergency at 9 p.m. Later, rinsing dishes, I heard Vivian's voice float in from the living room, light and offhand, talking to Ethan about nothing in particular, insurance paperwork, some errand she'd run that afternoon. Then, almost as an aside, I made sure everything's set up properly with the accounts, by the way. You two have enough on your plates without worrying about the boring stuff. That's what I'm here for. I stood at the sink with a plate frozen in my hands, water running over it long after it was already clean. I decided that night to stop mentioning things to Ethan until I actually had something undeniable to show him. I hated how quickly that decision came to me, how naturally I'd already started managing what I said out loud in my own home. The following week, at Sunday dinner, Vivian corrected the way I was seasoning the vegetables, corrected the way I answered a question about the nursery colors, corrected, gently, sweetly, in front of Ethan's aunt and uncle, my due date, insisting I must be misremembering, pregnancy brain, we all went through it. I know my own due date, Vivian. Of course you do, sweetheart. She patted my hand the way you'd pat a nervous dog. I just worry, is all. First pregnancies can be so disorienting. Everyone laughed lightly and moved on. I sat there with my face burning, that particular kind of humiliation that doesn't come from being yelled at, but from being gently, publicly, repeatedly implied to be a little bit unreliable in front of people who now had that implication quietly planted in their heads too. 2 days later, sorting through mail Vivian had already opened and stacked, to save me the trouble, I found a folded document half-tucked under a stack of coupons. A credit application. My name. My social security number, correct down to the last digit. And at the bottom, that same signature. Almost mine, not quite mine, that small extra hook on the S. I photographed every page with shaking hands before carefully placing it back exactly where I'd found it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to understand exactly how far this went before I said a single word out loud to anyone in that house. I found Priya Anand through a coworker whose sister had gone through something similar with a business partner, a forensic document examiner who spent her days testifying in exactly this kind of case. I brought her the photographs, the welcome packet, everything I'd quietly gathered over 2 weeks of pretending nothing was wrong at my own dinner table. She spread the images across her desk and studied them for a long, silent minute. "These weren't traced," she said finally. "Whoever did this studied your actual signature closely, probably from something you'd signed and left lying around the house. It's a good forgery. Not perfect, but good enough to pass casual inspection at a bank counter." "How much money are we talking about?" She pulled up the account records I'd requested online the week before, tracing recurring transfers with her finger. $18,400, moved out of your joint account in 6 weekly transfers over the past month and a half. All authorized with a signature matching the one on this card. $18,000. Almost exactly the amount Ethan and I had been quietly saving toward a house down payment for 2 years. "There's something else," Priya said, more carefully now. "This kind of pattern, small test transfers first, then escalating amounts once nothing gets questioned, that's not someone improvising. That's someone who's done this before." Something cold moved through me, a half-formed thought I hadn't let myself follow yet. I thought of Ethan's older brother Marcus, someone I'd met exactly twice in 14 months of marriage, and the strange, careful silence that always followed any mention of his ex-wife. I thought about how quickly, and how completely, that entire side of the family had agreed she was the difficult one. I found Marcus's ex-wife, Renata, through a mutual friend on social media, and spent 2 days rewriting a single message before I finally sent it. "This is going to sound strange, but I think your former mother-in-law may have done something to you similar to what she's doing to me right now. Would you be willing to talk?" She called me within the hour. "I used to think I was losing my mind," Renata said, voice tight even 6 years later. "Money disappearing from accounts I barely used. Documents I didn't remember signing. When I brought it to Marcus, Vivian was always right there, gently suggesting I was under a lot of stress, maybe not remembering things clearly. Eventually Marcus believed her over me. Everyone did. I left with almost nothing, and the entire family still tells people I was controlling and unstable." "How much did she take from you?" "I never proved the exact number. That's the thing. By the time I understood what was happening, I didn't have the energy left to fight for proof. I just left." I sat with that for a long moment, grief and fury tangling together in a way I hadn't fully felt until right then, not just for myself, but for a woman I'd never met, who'd been quietly erased from her own marriage and then blamed for the exact thing being done to her. "I have proof," I told her. "Forensic analysis, bank records, all of it. If you're willing, I think we could finally show this family what actually happened to both of us." The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then, quietly, "It's about time someone believed me." I didn't confront anyone yet. Renee, The same instinct that had kept me quiet through the credit application, through Sunday dinner, through every small humiliation I'd absorbed with a practiced smile, told me I needed the full picture locked down first, or Vivian would find some way to make this look like exactly what she'd made it look like for Renata. I hired a family law attorney, Devin Okafor, and spent the next 10 days quietly building a case. Priya's forensic report, the full transfer history, Renata's sworn statement about the eerily similar pattern from 6 years earlier. Vivian, meanwhile, escalated in ways that made my skin crawl in hindsight, suddenly deeply invested in nursery furniture, suddenly suggesting she handle the baby's college fund paperwork, since she's so good with all that, suddenly once saying to Ethan within my hearing, "I do worry about Sophia lately. The hormones. She seems a little paranoid, don't you think?" I watched him hesitate before answering, and felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. 3 days before I planned to bring everything to Ethan, I intercepted a courier delivery addressed to Vivian, a document from a title company, requesting signatures for a home equity line against our house. Our house, not Vivian's. A house I owned jointly with my husband, and no one else. I photographed it before resealing the envelope exactly as I'd found it, hands shaking harder than they had at any point since this began. Whatever Vivian was planning, she was moving faster than I'd expected. I didn't have 10 more days. I had, at most, 2. I asked Ethan to meet me at a coffee shop across town, somewhere neutral, somewhere Vivian couldn't casually walk into the middle of the conversation. I laid it all out in order: the forged signature card, Priya's forensic report, the $18,000, the intercepted home equity documents, and finally, gently, Renata's statement. I watched 15 years of family mythology collapse across my husband's face in real time. "This isn't, Mom wouldn't," he stopped himself, staring at the forensic comparison Priya had prepared, the 2 signatures side by side, the small telling hook on the S impossible to argue with once you knew to look for it. Renata told people Mom was the villain in that divorce. Everyone said Renata was unstable. "Everyone believed what your mother told them to believe," I said quietly. "The same way you almost believed I was being paranoid 3 days ago, when she said it about me." He put his head in his hands, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. "I dismissed you," he finally said, voice rough. "Every time you brought something to me, I found a reason it was probably nothing. I did that because it was easier than believing my own mother could do something like this. I am so sorry, Sophia. I need you to actually believe me now," I said. "Not just apologize. Believe me, and help me stop this before she gets access to our house." He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, something hardening in his expression that I hadn't seen directed at his mother in 14 months of marriage. "Tell me what you need me to do." We confronted her together that evening, in our own living room, the same room she'd spent 6 weeks quietly rearranging to her own preferences. Vivian's face, when Ethan laid the documents across the coffee table, went through a rapid, practiced sequence of expressions: confusion first, then wounded surprise, then something colder underneath both once she understood we weren't going to be talked out of what we already knew. "I don't know what you think you've found," she said, "but I have only ever tried to help this family." "You forged Sophia's signature," Ethan said, voice steadier than I'd heard it in the entire confrontation. $18,000, Mom. And you tried to put a lien against our house 3 days ago. You have no idea what kind of pressure I've been under." Her composure cracked for the first time, something raw and furious underneath the warmth she'd worn like a costume for 6 weeks. "Marcus is drowning in debt from that restaurant failing. Do you understand what it's like to watch your child lose everything and have no way to help him? I was going to pay it all back once things stabilized. I have always paid everything back." "Renata never got anything back," I said quietly. "She got blamed instead." Something in Vivian's face flickered at her name. recognition, quickly buried. That situation was completely different. It wasn't, I said. It was exactly the same, down to the excuse. Vivian looked between us, searching for the version of this conversation where her explanation still worked on someone in the room. She didn't find it. I raised you alone, she said to Ethan, voice trembling now. I sacrificed everything for this family, and this is how you repay me, believing her over your own mother? I'm not choosing her over you, Ethan said quietly. I'm choosing the truth over a story I should have questioned a long time ago. The fallout moved faster than I expected once it was documented instead of whispered. Devon filed a formal fraud report with Sterling Trust and our joint bank, both of which opened internal investigations within days once Priya's forensic analysis was submitted alongside the transfer history. Vivian's attorney, hired within 48 hours of the confrontation, pushed hard for a quiet settlement rather than criminal charges, citing her age and health following the hip surgery. Devon was blunt about our options: pursue prosecution and risk a long public process, or secure a binding restitution agreement with real teeth, guaranteeing full repayment and permanently barring her from any financial access to either of us, backed by the threat of prosecution if she violated a single term. We chose the second option, not out of mercy exactly, but because Ethan needed to grieve the mother he thought he had before he could fully process prosecuting the one who actually existed. The agreement was airtight. $18,400 repaid over 18 months, full financial no-contact provisions, and, at my insistence, a formal written acknowledgement naming what had actually happened to Renata 6 years earlier, which Devon made sure reached every family member who'd once called her unstable. Vivian moved out within the week, into her own apartment across town, funded by a modest retirement account Devon confirmed was entirely legitimate. Ethan drove her there himself, mostly in silence, and came home looking like someone who'd aged 5 years in a single afternoon. She's still my mother, he told me that night, sitting on the edge of our bed. I don't know how to feel about any of this. You don't have to know yet, I said. You just have to keep choosing what's true, even when it's not comfortable. Renata cried on the phone when I called to tell her the acknowledgement letter had gone out to the full family. Not from sadness, she said, but from the specific disorienting relief of finally being believed 6 years too late. Marcus's reaction was harder to predict. He called Ethan twice, angry the first time, quieter and more shaken the second, once he'd had time to sit with what his mother had actually done to fund his failing restaurant. I keep thinking about all the years I told people Renata made everything up, he told Ethan. I didn't just lose her. I helped bury her. There's no clean way to fix 6 years of a family believing the wrong story. Renata and Marcus haven't reconciled, and I'm not sure they ever will. But she called me again last month, quieter and lighter than the first conversation, just to say thank you. Not for restoring anything with Marcus, but for the simple overdue experience of an entire family finally hearing the truth out loud. Ethan and I moved through the following months rebuilding something that felt different than what we'd had before, steadier, more honest, built on the specific understanding that loving someone means actually investigating the things that frighten you about them, instead of quietly hoping they'll turn out fine on their own. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in early spring, 7 pounds 2 ounces, loud from her very first breath. Vivian sent a card. We haven't decided yet what a relationship with her grandmother looks like going forward, or if there's room for one at all. Some things, I'm learning, don't resolve into a clean, satisfying ending. They just become the next honest chapter. I think often about the version of myself who almost let that first envelope go straight into the recycling, who spent 6 weeks doubting a feeling in her own chest because it was easier than believing someone she loved could be capable of this. I think about how close I came to becoming exactly what Vivian needed me to become: quiet, uncertain, easy to dismiss. What finally saved me wasn't dramatic. It was small and unglamorous: a locked bathroom door, a photographed document, a decision to trust one quiet, insistent feeling instead of the louder, more comfortable voices telling me to let it go. That instinct doesn't announce itself as courage while you're